Hello and welcome to Viper Bites, and it is that time of the year once again where we take a look at the training camps with our 2022 training camp preview series, starting with the NFC North. But before we dive right in, hey, take a second, hit that like, hit that subscribe button on here on the YouTube channel here on the Vipers Network. And if you're listening to us on any of those podcasting platforms, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, take a second, rate and review us. And now let's get into this. Let's start in Chicago with the Chicago Bears, and more particular at that quarterback position. Now for the Bears, these were Justin Fields' weekly finishes in his 9 starts where he played at least 65% of the snaps. QB 33, QB 32, QB 30, QB 21, 24, 6, 10, 12, 9. Those last 4 starts, those are the last 4 weeks basically of the season where Fields averaged 8.5 yards per carry. So when Justin Fields is running, this Bears team is a little bit more successful. And for those fantasy managers out there, Justin Fields needs to scramble a little bit to feel alive, at least on your fantasy rosters. When we look at the running back position there, David Montgomery, he suffered a mid-season knee injury, which really hurt that momentum from last season. But once he returned in week number 9, Montgomery played on 77% of the Bears' snaps, third most among all running backs in the National Football League, and he averaged 5 targets per game. So if you're in those PPR leagues, David Montgomery needs to be firmly on your radar, especially if you're going to that 5th round value right now where his ADP is currently sitting at. He also finished as a top 5 running back in fantasy points per game with 19 fantasy points during the playoffs. That's weeks 15 through 17, and that is courtesy of Graham Barfield's stat pack, which you can get over at thefantasypoints.com by using promo code VIPERS22. Save 10% there. Now, for the Bears and the wide receiver position, not a whole lot to talk about here outside of Darnell Mooney. He has secured himself wide receiver 1 status with at least 60 receptions and 95 targets in each of his first 2 seasons. The wide receiver 2 debate, you give a slight edge here to Byron Pringle. Yeah, it's maybe the worst wide receiver group in the National Football League, but rookie Velus Jones Jr., Equanimeous St. Brown, and Tajay Sharp. Yes, Tajay Sharp, he's still kicking around. They are all in that mix for that wide receiver 2 position. Why are they in the mix? Because Allen Robinson, he's no longer there. And when we look at what kind of targets Robinson commanded last year, he had 66 targets, which was not a whole heck of a lot. But after Mooney and Kmet, the next 3 receivers on that Bears team, they were all gone. Robinson, I mentioned that 66 targets. Marquise Goodwin, 40. Demir Bird, 38. Now, the tight end position for the Chicago Bears, Cole Kmet was tight end 19 last year, despite finishing with 8th most targets in the position. Now, last year, those 93 targets, 0 touchdowns. Jimmy Graham, Jesper Horsted, Jesse James, the outlaw himself, they combined for 34 targets and 6 touchdowns. And none of them are back in 2022. So Cole Kmet, tight end 19, wherever he's getting drafted, is too low. This is a tight end right now that is going to be vying for tight end 1 status before the season is set and done with. So definitely target Cole Kmet, fantasy managers. I am begging you right now. He is in line for a big season behind Darnell Mooney. Now we're talking about this Bears defense. Is Robert Quinn going to still be a Bear when week 1 rolls around? We know that the Bears are in a retooling type situation right now. Robert Quinn, hey, there's lots of teams out there right now that can use an all-pro caliber edge rusher coming off an 18.5 sack season. And the Bears, they have so many holes to fill that true contenders, they'd be begging to knock on the Bears' door to acquire the services of one Robert Quinn. If Quinn is moved, Mario Edwards is most likely to fill that void. And he's not going to fill it. It's going to have to be more of a committee, but Mario Edwards, he's the next guy in line when you look at that depth chart. Linebackers, Nicholas Morrow, Roquan Smith, they're pretty set for the first 2 linebacker spots, but who fills that 3rd role? Both Matthew Adams, Joe Thomas, they're not exactly the best options out there. Now, let's turn our attention to the Detroit Lions. Hey, season of change there in Detroit. We see what they're building there. They're out there biting kneecaps, so to speak, from last season, and that momentum has carried on into 2022. There is no QB competition here ahead of camp. But next year is going to be a completely different story. Expect one of those top quarterbacks in the 2023 class to end up in Detroit one way, shape, how, whatever you want to call it. CJ Stroud, Bryce Young there. Expect one of them to end up in Detroit. Now, of the 32 quarterbacks last season, Jared Goff, he actually performed pretty well when he had a clean pocket, ranking 11th with a on-target rate of 82.5%. Adding DJ Chark and the Yak Master himself, Jameson Williams, to his offensive weapons such as DeAndre Swift, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and TJ Hawkinson will hopefully open this offensive firepower that the Lions have deep down inside of them. A little bit of Axel Foley getting ready for that firepower there in Detroit, especially after last season's injuries. Now, the running back position, we know there was some time missed at the running back position between DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams. When they were in the lineup, when they were both there, they pretty much split those carries almost 50-50. And when you look at it, DeAndre Swift, 617 yards on the ground, 151 attempts, while Jamal Williams finished with 601 yards on 153 carries. Now, when they did miss, Craig Reynolds, he stepped in. He got some reps. I wouldn't count on him very much this year, but hey, he's still there in Detroit. Now, what will Swift's role be is yet to be seen, especially in that passing game. We expect DeAndre Swift to get a little bit of play in that passing game. Last year, St. Brown, Hawkinson, they were the only players to finish with more than 60 receptions on this Lions team. We also have DJ Chark. We also have Jameson Williams in the mix. There is certainly going to be a lot more mouths to feed this year in Detroit than last year. Now, when we turn our attention to the wide receiver position, who will finish as the Lions' top receiver? Who's going to be that alpha dog, that alpha cat, so to speak? We know Williams could miss some time early on and is going to likely need a little bit of an adjusting period as he continues to rehab from that ACL, which, by the way, he is ahead of schedule right now. St. Brown, he finished strong last season as a rookie with 125 fantasy points, which were the third most all-time for a rookie between weeks number 13 and 17. So he was coming on strong. That's where he made his name for himself last year. Now, granted, there were not the same kind of mouths to feed there in Detroit at that time as there is now. I mean, we're talking about guys like Khalif Raymond, Quintus Cephas, who's, by the way, still there. Not quite the same as what we have now for offensive firepower there in Detroit. That said, Williams, prior to tearing his ACL back in college at Alabama, 1,572 receiving yards on 79 receptions, 15 touchdowns in 15 games in that junior season. His 671 receiving yards on deep targets will definitely endear himself to Jared Goff. Now, St. Brown saw 119 targets last year with that receiver group I was mentioned there. Kadero Hodge, Quintus Cephas, Khalif Raymond, Josh Reynolds. Who emerges as that fourth option amongst the receivers there in Detroit, which is really the, option 6 when you look at this passing attack? If you include Swift and Hawkinson, will be Reynolds, will be Cephas, will be Raymond. Raymond led that trio last year with 48 receptions, 576 yards on 71 targets. Now let's look at the tight end position. Behind Hawkinson, we see James Mitchell, we see Brock Wright. So unless Hawkinson were to miss significant time, neither is a threat to cut into the production. The only time that this really matters, even if Hawkinson were to miss time, that just means one of these other receivers, maybe DeAndre Swift, is going to pick up a little bit more of those vacated targets. The real threats, like I said, they come from the additions in this talented skill group at the receivers position now. In 12 games, TJ Hawkinson finished with 61 receptions, 583 yards receiving, and 4 touchdowns. Now, when we look at this Detroit Lions defense, the Lions have been forming the Dan Campbell identity, and with the addition of Aiden Hutchinson, their defense is adding some difference makers. Charles Harris last year, 7.5 sacks. Julian Okwara, 5 sacks. Led the Lions in that category, yet both maybe penciled into backup roles ahead of training camp behind Aiden Hutchinson and behind Romeo Okwara there. Yes, Julian's brother, he's making a little bit of noise. Those Okwara family nights, they're about to get really interesting. Now, while the secondary looks pretty set, the linebacker group is below average at best. Derek Barnes, Alexander Zalone, Jared Davis is likely top on the team's depth chart, with another rookie, Malcolm Rodriguez, pushing for more of a prominent role moving forward. Now, when we talk about teams that have seen some change, we have to talk about the Green Bay Packers, especially in that NFC North. At quarterback, hey, the Packers are set. We know Aaron Rodgers, he's assuming that regular role, followed by Jordan Love, Kurt Benkirk, who developed a little bit of chemistry here during OTAs with Romeo Doubs, a name to kind of keep an eye on here as we move forward. Now, Davante Adams, he was traded in the offseason. However, Rodgers was there long before Adams arrived in 2016. He had success when Adams missed time throughout the years. And when we look at Rodgers, he has a passer rating of 112.7, 2,795 passing yards, 24 touchdowns, 3 interceptions in 11 games without Davante Adams since 2016. I think Rodgers, he's probably going to be okay. In fact, We see an increase in points per game for the Packers when Adams was unavailable, going from 26.5 points per game to 31.6 per contest without him. Something to keep an eye on there. Packers faithful, there's a little bit of hope there. Now at the running back position, one reason for that uptick in production without Davante Adams has been that increased workload, especially in the passing game for Aaron Jones. Since 2019, in the 7 games that Aaron Jones has played without Davante Adams on the field, he has seen his targets bump from 3.9 to 6.7, and his receiving yardage also increases from 21.6 yards per game to 55.4. Woo! Here we go. Let's keep it going here. We'll keep talking about the running backs. Now, towards the end of the season, A.J. Dillon really started to carve out a role in this Packers offense and began taking away a few touches away from Aaron Jones, especially in the ground game. Now, Dillon led Packers in carries with 187 and in yards 103 on the ground, narrowly edging out Aaron Jones in both those categories, while Jones missed 2 games due to injury. Kylan Hill versus Tyler Goodson, that is going to be a fun battle to watch in camp to see who emerges as that third running back. Either way, if Jones or Dillon were to go down, the other is going to certainly see the lion's share of the carries, the lion's share of the touches. Both Hill and Goodson may pick up a few crumbs, but I wouldn't bank on either one of them. Now, both Hill and Goodson, hey, they've both been draft Twitter darlings at one point or another. Talk about wide receivers. We keep on preaching about Davante Adams. He is not there. So let's talk about the 224 unaccounted for targets heading into 2022. We know some are going to go to Aaron Jones, but how will Aaron Rodgers spread the rest out? Heading into camp, Allen Lazard is the de facto wide receiver 1 in Green Bay. His 513 receiving yards from 2021 are the most on the current roster. He also had Aaron Rodgers look his way in the red zone at least 11 times with those 11 red zone targets last year. Green Bay's roster heading into camp. Hey, Marquez Valdes-Scantling is gone as well. So if you can't count on him, Randall Cobb, Sammy Watkins, Amari Rodgers. You got rookies there in Christian Watson, Romeo Dubes, and Samori Toure. That's what Aaron Rodgers is working with. How are these battles going to come out with? It's going to be fun. 2 camp battles that'll certainly be fun to watch. Watson versus Dubes. Not Sammy Watkins. Never Sammy. Now, saying that, Sammy Watkins, he is poised for a huge week 1. I mean, that's pretty much what he does. Now, as for the battle in the slot, it comes down to Randall Cobb versus former Clemson standout Amari Rodgers. Man, we know Aaron Rodgers petty enough to just throw touchdown passes to A. Rodgers all day long if that's what it would come down to. But hey, let's take a look at some of these other things right now. Because when we look at what OTAs back in after the draft, shortly after the draft, Watkins, he was battling a little bit of a case of the drops. Now, we're not going to knock a guy for dropping the ball. Hey, we overreacted to Jamar Chase last year having a few drop issues during the preseason. Christian Watkins is experiencing a little bit of that, but it's just a little bit harder to earn Aaron Rodgers' trust, especially when a guy like Romeo Dubes is out there absolutely making highlight reel catches, catch after catch after catch. Now, as for that battle, I mentioned that slot battle. Randall Cobb, he's already got that rapport with Aaron Rodgers, which certainly gives him the first right of refusal to play in the slot. But at some point, even Randall Cobb will realize that Amari Rodgers puts the Packers offense in a better position. So look for Cobb to remain the starter, maybe in title only, with Amari earning more and more reps as the season progresses. At the tight end position, welcome back Robert Tonyan. He looks to be returning after missing over half the season last year after tearing his ACL. In his absence, Mercedes Lewis, he brought in 23 passes for that starting role, which didn't really work out so well. 214 yards. So even one-leg Robert Tonyan, regardless of how ready he is to start the season, you can pretty much pencil him in for a 50 reception, 600-yard type season. That's kind of what I'm guessing at right now. I doubt he catches 11 touchdowns like he did way back in 2020, but Rodgers, he'll certainly be happy to have him back in the Packers uniform there on the sidelines next to him on the field. Now, for this Packers defense, Green Bay, they already know what life without Zadarius Smith is like. They didn't have him last season, and as he got hurt, so hey, you can't really miss what you didn't really have, right? Now, Rashawn Gary, Preston Smith, they led the way for this Packers pass rush, combining for 18.5 sacks, and help, it is on the way in the form of Jaron Reed and rookie Devontae Wyatt. Pairing both those additions with Kenny Clark and Dean Lowry adds some firepower up front for the Packers, but it'll be interesting to see if Wyatt can outright seize control over that position there over a guy like Jerron Reed. We know those outside linebackers, they're set. Gary and Smith as one inside linebacker there for last year. Devondre Campbell, he's got the other spot. So the question is, can Chris Barnes hold off a talented rookie in Quay Walker? I say no. Now, Barnes, he'll head in the camp as the likely starter, penciled in, but it won't take very long before Walker surpasses him in camp. Trust me on that. Now, last team in this NFC North. Let's go Minnesota Vikings, quarterback position here. Is this the year Vikings fans finally get Kellen Mond in that backup role behind Kirk Cousins? Last year, Sean Mannion, he filled in when Cousins went down. And while Mannion remains, I really don't see a scenario in which he can hold off Mond yet again. Fun fact, Justin Jefferson completed the same amount of passes last season as Mond did, 2, while attempting 1 more pass. Yes, Justin Jefferson attempted 4 passes in 2021 as Mond only attempted 3. And we know Vikings faithful, they want to see Mond get a little bit more play here in 2022. Now, I know we like to kick Kirk Cousins when he's down on the ground and ask him, you like that? But the truth is, over the last 2 seasons, he has finished as a weekly top 12 fantasy option 53% of the time. Yes, Kirk Cousins, over half the time that he's been in the lineup the last 2 seasons, has been a QB1. Now, since 2018, Kirk Cousins is 14th in fantasy points per game while ranking in the top 6 in both completion percentage at 68.3 and passer rating at 103.5. At the running back position, Dalvin Cook there, wound up on my injury risk management series there. So you know it's important to understand what the Vikings have behind him. In just 13 games, Cook had 249 carries, 34 receptions, 1,383 yards, and 6 touchdowns. So it is easy to understand and see why Alexander Mattison is one of the top pairing running backs out there. In fantasy, if Cook were to miss any time, it is easy to rationalize that Mattison would fall into that RB9 to RB14 rather easily, especially if new head coach Kevin O'Connell unleashes this offense, and he loves to run that run zone scheme there. So, hey, Mattison, Dalvin Cook, both guys who love to run a little bit of zone. After Cook and Mattison, the battle for the 3rd spot on this chart becomes interesting. You got Keenan Nwangwu there returning to the mix, along with rookie running backs Ty Chandler and Brian Kopak. Nwangwu may have a better services here in the return game. So Chandler versus Kopak, that's where the interesting running back battle is going to come down to. Now, conventional wisdom says the back who played in the SEC and the ACC has the advantage over anyone else, but the former Toledo Rocket, Brian Kopak, cannot be dismissed. It's rare for an undrafted free agent to make some noise, but when you go for 1,734 scrimmage yards and put up another 18 touchdowns in just 13 games, it doesn't matter if you're playing D1, D2, wherever that's at. You have some talent, you have some ability, and you have some skill to work with. Now, Kopak there, he is one of them athletic freaks. 4.49 40 time, 40.5-inch vertical, over a 10-foot broad jump. I mean, you want a guy with a little bit of hops, a little bit of explosion. Kopak's the guy that gives that to you from the Vikings perspective. At the wide receiver position, the Vikings, they are pretty set at wide receiver with Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, KJ Osborne, basically occupying those top three positions there. Now, Thielen, he tied the team for touchdowns last year with 10, despite only playing in 13 games. However, Osborne is more of a threat moving forward this year than he was at the start of last year's training camp. Thielen's efficiency nosedived last year as he slipped to 48th in receiving yards gained per route run, 1.63. Thielen saw 95 targets, hauling in 67 of them, while Osborne, maybe taking advantage of Thielen's absence, got 50 passes on 82 targets. BC Johnson, Amir Smith-Marset, Jalen Naylor, they may get some significant interest here in camp and put themselves on the map, but until something were to happen to those big three, don't expect a whole lot out of them. Now, the tight end position, Ben Ellefson, Zach Davidson, Johnny Mont. Minnesota here better hope they get a full 17-game season out of Irv Smith in 2022. It's time for us to see where that hype meets that production as it pertains to Irv Smith. Tyler Conklin, he is gone. He moved to greener pastures. Get it? He's with the New York Jets now. As to are his 87 targets and nearly 600 receiving yards. When we talk about this Vikings defense, hey, we know there's some talented teams there in the NFC. It's not quite the AFC, but there's some teams that can play some ball. The only thing worth really mentioning here is for ID Pierce is a backup linebacker spot. Minnesota brought in Jordan Hicks, pairing him with Eric Kendricks here, signaling they're pretty much ready to move on from Anthony Barr. So don't expect Anthony Barr, who is still a free agent, to sign back with the Minnesota Vikings. Barr, he may be getting older, hence the transition from the Vikings there, but look for guys like Brian Asamoah there to challenge Blake Lynch and Chaz Surratt, former quarterback, for reps in that Vikings linebacking core. With that all being said, hey, make sure you are heading over to fantasypoints.com. Use that promo code Vipers22. Get 10% off that Fantasy Points subscription. And make sure to take a second, hit that like, hit that subscribe button, because we are coming at you with the full every division preview heading into the training camp. And we got so much more content coming at you on the Vipers Network. We will see you next time. Take care.